Greetings and good Thursday morning, the 21st of April, 2022, third decade of the 21st century. This is take two. Apparently, my sister had an asthma attack and my wife had to go take care of her. So, in this video, I'm going to respond to Stace Catalin and elaborate a little bit further on some topics. And hopefully, later today, Miss Sheila and I will get a chance to Zoom. The reason I say that is, at the risk of misinterpreting intent, at the risk of misinterpreting what she's saying, I found myself a bit frustrated lately. And I think that is unfortunately common when two people cannot converse back and forth, give and take, where I make a video, then she makes a response video, where it just leaves a little bit of ambiguity, it leaves a little bit of room for miscommunication, or it leaves the opportunity for misunderstanding. And I found myself getting frustrated to the point where I'm spiraling, I'm rambling. I've made numerous videos, none of which were worth producing and publishing. So I think it's just the point right now where her and I need to be face-to-face in a Zoom call, and we can exchange communication more effectively and either defend what we're trying to say and how it's coming across or whatnot. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do that. It is currently about 9:45 my time, so it's probably 8:45 Miss Sheila's time. So Miss Sheila, you got my number. Text me when you're available, and hopefully I'll be available. I got to run some errands, but hopefully I'll get those done. So without further ado, Miss Stace Catalin. So the law in Texas that I have referenced a couple of times, a couple of instances, is different from Florida. The law I'm referring to allows Child Protective Services to remove children from their home if the child's parent accepts the child identifying as transgender and the parent supports any act of transitioning. What I mean by any act of transitioning means just allowing the child to present as the gender they identify with. So if I'm understanding you correctly, Stace, if I was in Texas and my daughter or my son decided that my daughter felt more masculine and wanted to dress more masculine, or if my son felt more feminine and wanted to wear feminine clothing or express himself effeminately, and vice versa with my daughter, that according to the law in Texas, regardless of who's interpreting it, sheriffs, municipal police, whatever, that my children could be removed from me just for that alone. Now, I'm not letting prepubescent, non-adult minor children, I'm not supporting them go through hormone replacement therapy or transitioning surgeries. I'm not going that far. I'm just letting them express and identify, whether it's an experiment, whether it's a phase, whether it's truly who they are. If I'm letting them try that or do that, you're saying in Texas the children can be removed. I don't agree with that. I think that's maybe pushing things a little bit too far, and I think that's where you see the more negative virtues of people who unite under the conservative banner, which is why I have a real hard time with certain labels. Traditionally, I think I would be a classical liberal, probably more of a libertarian independent. I find conservatives less offensive, but that doesn't mean I don't find them offensive on occasions. I unfortunately despise the Democratic Party in principle alone. I've said this numerous times, and I've got an entire back catalog, but if each video is a standalone video, then perhaps maybe I should always clarify that. I also think that people who've pushed beyond the actual concept of liberalism, people who tend to align with the Democratic Party, I think they tend to push things too far. And then equally and opposite, I think the Conservative Party in Texas may be pushing this a bit too far, where it's one thing to start supporting surgeries and whatnot, because I can tell you verbatim, at the age of 46, I've only lived 46 years, and I have growing to do. I'll make some mistakes. I'll learn from them, whatever the case may be. I'm a much different person than I was at my children's age. My daughter will soon be 17. My son will soon be 14. And I don't think they're in a position to make those type of body modifications, whether it's through hormone replacement therapy or whatnot. And you may not like my words, and I don't mean them intentionally to be aggressive or offensive. I just say them in the sense that, as neutral as I'm trying to be on the subject, it's not a subject I'm really into. It's not a subject I'm really agreeing with. But I'm willing to let people live. I don't think parents should be putting their children in a position to have surgeries and hormone replacement therapy. But if you want to dress a certain way, I don't see why a parent should lose their parental rights because of that. All right, had to let the wife get through the door. Carrying on. So, Austin is very purple, meaning it is a balanced mixture of all political views. I don't watch the Weather Channel due to being taught by my stepdad, that the chance of rain will always be 50-50. It either will rain, but it won't. What I mean about movie studios and contract movies, the times of Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, etc., one example I can use is the time Paramount Pictures arranged for Elizabeth Taylor to be Montgomery Clift's date for his movie. The heiress, in order to generate publicity for the movie. The studio then set up the couple to star in at least 3 movies together. They had a friendship only, but the studio had them date. Cliff, right? Am I saying that? Cliff? Yeah. Cliff was gay, or at least bisexual, but had to hide his sexuality due to the time period. You have mentioned not having white privilege before. Well, hang on. Before I go on to that. Yeah, okay. I understand what you're saying. It's one of those unfortunate aspects where the business side gets involved and they do things from a business perspective, like what does the target audience want? What is going to potentially generate, more profits through more viewing? Is it potentially more profitable if the public believes that the two of them are potentially a couple? I apologize, Stace. I don't know if I really have an opinion on that, other than I'm still a big fan of UBU. I don't know that I'm overwhelmingly so interested in everything that goes on. And at the risk of sounding like a hypocrite, I'm a big Supernatural fan, I'm a big Smallville fan, and I'm a fan of other shows as well, where I tend to gravitate towards those actors and actresses. I don't know how much I want to know about their personal life necessarily. And I say that now because certain actors and actresses I would probably disagree with, maybe sociopolitically or maybe just in general, but I do enjoy their performances. So I see what you're saying. I just don't know if I have much of a response. So you have mentioned not having white privilege before due to growing up poor. Privilege itself should not be attached to a monetary value. There is an advantage to being white, whether a cis man or female presenting gender fluid person as myself. Honestly, I wasn't originally going to comment on the video. I felt the strong desire to educate on the law in Texas. I also wanted to give an example of what I meant by contract movies. While you were talking about your childhood, freaking spam, I also felt the need to bring up the issue I have had with you stating in the past that you don't have white privilege. I apologize if this comment is lengthy. Stace, no apologies needed. See, we can totally agree on certain things and disagree on others, which I'll get to in a moment. I can understand the concept of white privilege in any way, shape, or form. I can understand it. I think the term white privilege, and this is my personal take, I think it can sometimes be conflated with skin complexion versus other characteristics. I don't know what it's like where you live, Stace, but when I was much younger, growing up in Chicago, in the Chicagoland area, we still had ethnic neighborhoods, as in when people had migrated at certain periods in time, they formed their own neighborhoods, like a Polish neighborhood, a Bohemian neighborhood, a German neighborhood, Italian. I think you get the gist. And typically speaking, when those people migrated, part of the reason they formed their own neighborhoods is because they were heavily persecuted against. Because typically speaking, if one group of people's already here, and let's just say they're working for 50 cents an hour, then a new group comes in and they're willing to work for 45 cents an hour. Tragically, as a business owner, whether I'm a millionaire, legacy millionaire, old money, new money, I can see the value in saving a nickel per hour. And where I grew up, that was quite prevalent. Is a lot of bigotry and or hatred or adverse feelings was a result of livelihood. I finally etched out a living, etched out a livelihood, etched out my place in the world, as an Irishman, and now the Polish are coming in and they're undermining my jobs and they're taking all my jobs and they're threatening my ability to basically afford to live. And that's what I remember growing up. In which case, what I also remember growing up was we had what you might call class privilege. There were those who had money and those who didn't, and those who had more than others, so they lived better than others. And I just remember growing up in low-income apartments where the one thing I shared in common with everybody, regardless of skin color, was we were poor. Now, I think and this is my personal opinion, we do not have to agree. Some people conflate privilege with conduct. If a certain conduct is stereotypical with a negative, and it's associated with a negative value, so pick a group, whether it's a group within white culture, whether it's a group within black culture, brown culture, whatever the case may be. If there is a negative stereotype, but it is culturally popular, and people who are not familiar but are somewhat familiar with the negative value of that stereotype, maybe that's where people are conflating privilege. But I've been pulled over for suspicious vehicle. I've been pulled over for the way that I looked. I've been discriminated against for being the wrong ethnicity in the wrong neighborhood, both in Illinois and at times in Hawaii. There were neighborhoods in Hawaii where I had friends that I had to be escorted into the neighborhood because I was a haole. So from my own personal experiences, I don't recall ever having benefited from my skin complexion, with perhaps one example. I drove through a state that is not necessarily known for being tremendously diverse, and I just remember being awfully nervous about stopping for gas in that state, because I was afraid to open my mouth and have them hear me speak. And then the next thing you know, I'm experiencing some sort of wrong turn, the hills have wrong turn or deliverance type scenario. And that is me horrifically judging that state. That is me horrifically stereotyping that state. But it alludes to a greater topic. I could spiral and go on and on and on about my thoughts on white privilege versus I could make equal arguments about other skin complexion. Based on my own personal observations, I think other socio groups, other ethnic groups take advantage of their pigmentation, because there's this massive wave, this massive trend of, oh, you're marginalized, and because you're marginalized, therefore you're special, and you're susceptible to special treatment. Oh, you're a white heterosexual male, so therefore you have zero social value, and you must bow down and kowtow to the marginalized groups. And from what I've personally witnessed and personally experienced is the people who claim marginalized status, the people who claim minority status, the people who claim victim status, I see them peacocking around almost as if to dare people, what. And I think that's a form of privilege. We don't have to agree. So on that note, all right, one of the many reasons I started this channel is I felt as though the media was attempting to, through the way that they shape their stories, the way that they form their narratives to support their ultimate conclusions, was that the media was attempting to tell us how to think. The media was forcing us to pick a side, you know, take up arms, pitch a tent, and become part of that camp. And I'm terribly grateful for you and Miss Sheila and anybody else who wants to get involved on this channel who may or may not disagree. It's all too easy when people agree with you and they support you and it becomes an echo chamber, but it doesn't open up any dialogue or discourse if all they do is agree and they don't provide any counterpoints. Let's take the topic of white privilege. Let's say you and I disagree, Stace. Where do we go? You know, do we take up arms? Do we draw a line in the sand? Or do we just like, well, you know, I can see how maybe you feel that way, or I can appreciate that you might feel that way, but I disagree. And then, you know, do we also take a moment to reflect and take stock of, okay, well, what is my investment? Is there any investment, emotional, social, financial? I mean, is there anything to gain? Is there anything to lose? Or is it just a topic of conversation? Is it just a potential socio-political topic that really doesn't have a tremendous amount of weight or value? In which case, we could differ on that. You might think that the concept of white privilege holds a tremendous amount of value and provides a tremendous amount of impact, potentially adverse impact, on non-white persons, and we can expand upon that. The point that I'm trying to make is this. I was getting the impression and the feeling that as though there were powers, there were entities, there were not a conspiracy per se, but like in the case of the media, where you absolutely had to have an opinion that you were willing to die for. You had to pick a side, red or blue. You had to pitch a tent. You had to take up arms, and you had to go do battle. And I feel like between you and Miss Sheila that we're trying to find a better way. That we're trying to, well, okay, we don't agree. And if you want to expand on it, we can absolutely expand on it. We can have dialogue. Maybe the dialogue can be aggressive, as long as we can, at the end of the day, recognize and realize I'm not going to dehumanize you. I'm not going to demonize you. I'm not going to try to adversely affect your livelihood, adversely affect your life, because that's what I saw happening is, you know, whether it was doxing, and I think Miss Sheila had an issue with this where she disagreed with somebody and that person took it to the extreme where they were trying to adversely affect her. And maybe she'll expand upon that if she'd like to. I disagree with that premises. I disagree that we have to take things to that extreme. Okay? You say you disagree. You also let me know if you'd like to expand on it anymore, if you'd like to create that conversation, if you'd like to continue to have this conversation, whether aggressively, non-aggressively, but at the end of the day, if we're both willing to be like, okay, well, we see things differently. You're still a productive member of society, you're still a good person, you still treat people decently, why should you be adversely affected for thinking and feeling differently? And hopefully that's the goal we're achieving here. You know, good, bad, or indifferent. Right now it's you and Miss Sheila and maybe a couple others. I think we as a society, we can do better. Maybe it stays with us. Maybe it grows and expands. Maybe other people start channels, if they don't already exist, where we're attempting to bridge these gaps. Oh, okay, so you disagree. That's cool. You know, I like Legos. I like Star Wars Legos. I have plenty of them. May not be something you're into. I'm a home brewer. I like to make beer. It might not be something you're into. But does it mean we have to go to battle with one another? Does it mean we have to dox each other and adversely affect each other and try to get each other fired from our jobs? That's the absurd and preposterous thing that I don't understand. So Stace, Sheila, and anybody else, the ball's in your court. We can disagree on topics. We can continue to expand on the topic of white privilege. All right? I have no problem with that. My only request is this. If you want to get involved in the conversation, if you want to partake in the dialogue, if you want to continue the conversation, you must do so from the understanding and the platform that we know we don't wish to adversely affect each other. We can disagree. We can disagree passionately, but not having any intent to adversely affect one another, not attack one another, not go after our livelihoods and not threaten our way of life and not threaten our livelihoods. And Ms. Sheila, if you want to expand on your experience from a neutral position, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus, but you gave me an example of something that happened to you, and I thought it was horrific just because you disagreed. But until then, I want to get this out there. You're awesome. Sorry, one last saved round. Got to do it. Miss Sheila, haha. I wanted to make more videos, but I've had some ups and downs with COVID myself. So just a couple of comments to answer your question. My original content videos, I didn't really edit or redo or anything. I just did them for better or worse. Cool. The part I found harder was that after that I had considered reacting to comments and how to do that. And oh my God, bless your heart. Ooh, be careful with that, Miss Sheila. Down here, bless your heart. That's the southern equivalent of fuck you. Just a heads up. Because I way underestimated how long it would take even without reading every comment, and it got messy real fast. I went long and then felt like it was all wrong because the video would be forever, and then after I just did responses to the first two videos, everything just fell all out of order. And I know that without even rewatching them, so I decided not to publish them. Then I got super sick again with symptoms, but also just got demotivated. I sent off some messages here and there, but have been trying to get up the energy, and I'm deciding whether or not to give it a go again, or whether to do something else. Anyway, we'll see how things go. Speaking of COVID, definitely not the flu, which is why we didn't have vaccine technology ready right away. Novel coronavirus, old coronaviruses that we also haven't had vaccines to include things like, in greatly different degrees of severity, the common cold, SARS, that started to spread in 2002, and MERS. The last one has an incredible death rate, but thankfully not an incredible infectivity and was contained. But due to how severe they can be, they've been researched a lot for years. This particular form, COVID-19, is not as deadly as MERS, of course, but is really pretty bad and is a form of SARS. Just a much more pandemic-y one. And now that it spreads so far and keeps mutating, it's getting very infectious, which means that more and more mutations can form. How bad they are and how deadly is sort of just up to random chance and natural selection, since we missed the window and opportunities to contain it. Yeah, that kind of goes back to our original video. I apologize if I get this wrong, but I worked for a buddy of mine during the COVID layoff, and his wife is actually a naval doctor. And if I remember correctly, she said COVID-19 is a strain of influenza that is normally found in bats and has had no other reason to cross the human barrier. I'll be honest, I don't know what the truth is as far as how it crossed the human barrier. If it was somebody who ate bat soup, which it's my understanding that at certain temperatures, the vast majority of viruses die just because of heat. I could be wrong. Maybe COVID-19 is impervious to heat. I also don't know if the soup was a cold soup or if it was prepared, hot enough to kill off the virus, or like other people who speculate that it was concocted in a lab and that the experiment escaped its controls. I don't know. Like you and I had talked, I think the whole COVID-19 thing became way overly politicized because it was an opportunity to become politicized. It was an opportunity to capitalize on a situation that was going to be potentially divisive, because as with all new types of infections, there's always going to be a population at risk, and there's always going to be a population that's less at risk. You and I don't necessarily have to agree on that, but that's what makes our society what it is. You and I are just two people, but we're two people that are part of a multi-million person society who have various degrees of thoughts on this concept, where some are like, we didn't panic enough, some are like, we need to continue to panic, some are like, stop panicking, some are like, we should have never panicked at all. So, as you can imagine, there's a tremendous amount of diversity on that particular subject. I also think how we as a society handled it was wrong, where we allowed it to become politicized, and we have this horrific tendency to allow our identities to become politicized, this identity politics. And I think I was honestly very guilty of it. If you go back and look at my back catalog, I was probably succumbing to identity politics, and I'm trying really hard to overcome that because I'm not all the way there to being a full-fledged Republican conservative, but I'm certainly not on the left either. Well, maybe on certain subjects, but I digress. And it was just funny, just watching people, break up friendships, watching families break up over the over politicization of COVID. And just look at us, all right? I don't want to say we're disagreeing, but, even us have different thoughts and different ideas and different opinions on what COVID is or whatnot due to just the overwhelming amount of information and how much of it is accurate and how much of it isn't, because it doesn't suit this particular channel's narrative, because this channel's a left-leaning channel, this channel's a right-leaning channel. Who's in the middle? Who's just reporting the facts and letting us make our own opinions? So that's all I got to say about that. Miss Sheila, if the opportunity arises, let's try to get together and do a Zoom. You're awesome.